In the last arc, our core characters' dynamics were torn to shreds, as they were forced to evaluate their social priorities and had major revelations in regards to the way they felt about each other. Each character has left that arc and entered this one devastated in their own way, and each has their own means of coping with that devastation. But over the course of these 2 episodes, each of their coping mechanisms will eventually fall apart as they clash with each other and the reality of their situation. Chapter 1. Trying to Cope. Out of all our main characters, Tiger was the one to face the most change during the Christmas arc, and we begin this arc with an acknowledgement of that change. Ever since the end of episode 2, Tiger has understood Ryuji to be someone special to her. This was strongly reaffirmed at the end of the pool arc when she declared that Ryuji was hers, and she began to realize that their plan was a problem in the beach house arc. It was in the Christmas arc that she finally understood how much Ryuji meant to her and how she really felt about him. Of course, these feelings would only get in the way of her selfless effort to get him together with Minori, something she believes will make him happy. Her goal in this arc is to get Minori and Ryuji together, because she believes that this will give Ryuji and Minori the happiness that she feels they deserve. And right now, their happiness is a larger priority than her own. This, of course, creates some internal conflict, as she helps Ryuji to pursue his love for Minori while also loving him herself. To cope with this situation, she distances herself from Ryuji. She tells him that she's doing this to correct a misconception from Minori, that she has it in her head that I need you, and that she wants to convince her otherwise. But on top of this, Tiger also hopes that distancing herself will make her own feelings for Ryuji fade away. However, she eventually comes to realize that love does not work like that. Ryuji begins this arc in a state of despair, believing that Minori is simply not interested in a relationship with him. He has spent the better part of this show becoming a more socially competent and confident person, but being rejected by Minori has seemingly reverted him back to his old shy self-loathing state. He only gets out of this state because Tiger is able to convince him that there is still hope. This, combined with how hard Tiger is working to become self-sufficient so that she no longer gets in the way, is what leads Ryuji to his coping mechanism: to keep persisting, to return to his old mischievous behavior and try the same old plan again. This results in him stepping up and becoming bolder around Minori, even somewhat flirting with her while they walk to school together. While we are not yet ready to discuss how Ryuji's coping mechanism fails, I will say that the reason is set up during the arc itself. When Tiger tries to keep her distance, Ryuji more or less allows her to do so and doesn't argue about it as much as he had in the Christmas arc. And this willingness to let her go eventually becomes a source of regret for him. Ami exits the Christmas arc having lost faith in Ryuji, and this lack of faith manifests in frustration and a severe lack of patience. Ami has always contributed an outsider's perspective to the story, especially to Ryuji. The moment in the cave when she told him that Minori wasn't a good match for him, the scene in the Culture Festival arc when she implies that he has some growing up to do, and most notably in the Christmas arc when she warned Ryuji that the game he was playing would end with someone getting hurt. After Ryuji has failed to take any of this on board, Ami seemingly gives up and doesn't want anything to do with him. This is until she finds out that he was rejected by Minori, and concludes that someone finally did get hurt. Ami's way of coping with this is to force everyone involved to honestly confront the part they each played. The way she drops hints about Tiger being hurt as well, or the way she passive-aggressively predicts disaster when she sees Ryuji and Minori together, both seem to be sending a message that she wants to air out everyone's dirty laundry, but she only delivers that message in subtle ways. At first. Out of all our core characters, Minori may have left the Christmas arc happiest. Not directly afterwards, of course, but in the long run, making the decision she did to choose Tiger over Ryuji and setting it in stone has seemingly taken the pressure off and allowed her to return to the cheerful, bubbly girl we first met. Over the course of the Christmas arc, she had been conflicted on what to do about her feelings for Ryuji, being constantly torn between pursuing what will make her happy and potentially denying that happiness to her best friend. Her final decision was to let Ryuji go, and now she's free to live her life again, knowing that the decision has been made and no longer needs to be worried about. Of course, there are some glimpses that she may want to take back that decision, especially at the crosswalk after accidentally grabbing Ryuji's hand, but there is also a moment in Taiga's apartment that reminds her why she made the decision she did. When she realizes how much cleaner the place is, she attributes this positive change in Taiga's life to Ryuji, thus justifying her rejection of him. However, it's important to note that this idea of accepting her decision only happens in Minori's mind. Externally, she pretends as though the rejection never happened. Throughout this arc, we begin to get the sense that Minori is someone who is averse to conflict. She pretends to forget about what happened between her and Ryuji, tries to easily settle the argument between Noto and Kihara, and there's one more piece of evidence that we can see in one particular scene. Chapter 2. Conflict in Coping. This is the part where it gets good. Out of all the coping mechanisms that our characters have, 2 of them are completely incompatible. Minori wants to pretend it never happened, while Ami wants everyone to confront the part they played. This friction creates conflict between Ami and Minori, and this leads to a verbal confrontation unlike any we have seen in the show. When Minori is asked by Kihara and Kashi as to who she thinks Taiga has a crush on, Minori pretends to know nothing about it. This fits in perfectly with her pretend it never happened approach. However, she still struggles to adhere to that tactic herself, as we see when Kihara talks about Ryuji and Taiga getting together, and Minori cannot help but look upset. This is when Ami enters the conversation. She draws attention to the fact that Minori has gotten quiet again and heavily implies that there is a reason behind it. Her motivation for this is to get Kihara and Kashi asking what it could be. It works, and now that Ami has an excuse to grill Minori, she gives her one more chance to come clean on her own terms. But when Minori refuses to, Ami spills the beans and confronts her on rejecting Ryuji before he asks her out. Minori is taken aback by this confrontation and isn't sure how to go forward. She elects to make it clear that this is not something she wants to discuss. God, Ami, why are you even bringing this up? While this does make Kihara and Kashi aware that this is not a conversation that Minori wants to take part in, Ami does not back down. She proceeds to explain everything that she is aware of in order to force Minori to confront the situation that she has been hiding from this whole time. Takasu's in love with you. Not Taiga, but before he could tell you, you shut him down. Gave him the old let's stay friends forever story, took off and left him standing there. And now you're sitting here, acting like it never happened. Ami is setting up a pretty bleak narrative here, one in which Minori was callous in her dismissal of Ryuji, a rather black and white tale of a cold-hearted rejection. Minori dismisses this narrative outright. You know nothing about nothing. Did you see it happen? You don't know how I feel or what I feel. You're not a mind reader. And guess what? It's none of your business. In doing this, Minori is trying to simultaneously inject some shades of grey into Ami's two-dimensional story by implying that there was more to it than she described, and also tell Ami in a more direct way that this is not a conversation she wants to have. Once again, Ami is not bothered by Minori's desire for this conversation and continues to push. This time by bringing up the very words that sent Minori into her downward spiral in the Christmas arc. Oh right, I get it now. This has nothing to do with you feeling guilty. A callback that Minori is none too pleased to hear. Ami continues by creating a new narrative, one in which Minori wasn't concerned with Taiga at all, but rather just didn't have any feelings for Ryuji whatsoever. She baits Minori to dismiss this narrative as well. The next time I see him, I'll be sure to let him know. This time Minori does not take the bait and instead seeks to end the discussion while she still has her composure. Go ahead, tell him, she says as she looks away as though finishing the conversation, but Ami prods one more time. Okay, should I go tell him now? And Minori, desperate for this conversation to be over and furious about this blatant interrogation, loses her composure altogether. Tell him, whatever, I don't give a damn! Ami is still not satisfied. Nice act. I almost believed you. She likely would have continued the argument further had Kihara not intervened at this moment and ended the fight. If you would indulge me for a moment, I actually have something to say about Kihara and Kashi in this scene. When I first watched this show, I assumed they were stock generic popular girls friends. The type to stand there and say nothing as their friend goes on to do nasty stuff. Wait, that's not a girl. But this moment illustrated to me that both of them are more than this. Both Kihara and Kashi call Ami out for being the instigator of the fight like real friends should, and I was kinda blown away by that the first time I watched this show. Ami uses her usual act to give an ungenuine apology, and Minori, blinded by her forget it ever happened mentality, offers ungenuine forgiveness. Chapter 3. Failure to Cope. I said at the start of the analysis that each character focused on in this arc had a coping mechanism for the state they were left in when the Christmas arc ended. I also said that each of their coping mechanisms would eventually fail. Well, it is in the final few scenes that this failure truly happens, starting with Ami. When alone with Ryuji, Ami confesses that it may have been her fault that he was rejected. She confesses to being mean towards Minori and admits that she doesn't know why. She does mention the fact that Minori refused to be honest with her and concludes that she isn't all that honest either. Over the course of this arc, Ami's goal has been to air out everyone's dirty laundry, to make them confront the part they played in the Christmas disaster. But all the while she refused to confront the reason that she even cared, because she actually likes Ryuji as well. Had Ami confronted Minori in a more private way and while sharing her own struggles over loving Ryuji, the confrontation might not have been so aggressive, and Minori may have even opened up to Ami the way she wanted. But Ami's unwillingness to confront her own motivations has torn her coping mechanism to shreds. Then Minori enters the picture on a speeding sled and we see her coping mechanism fall to pieces as well. When Ami reignites the argument they had the night before, Minori immediately fires up. We find out that she did not, in fact, forgive and forget, or pretend that it never happened. Now, I'm not going to suggest that she should have done either of those things, or even that Ami expected them of her, but rather it is the glorification that Minori gives to these ideals, and the lengths she goes to enforce them not only on herself, but on others as well, that create the frustration for Ami. Your holier-than-thou attitude pisses me off. At this moment, we see the facade of someone who can move on from anything crack away, as she pushes her adversary, beginning the physical altercation that results in Minori's hair clip, the one that Ryuji had bought her for Christmas and that Taiga is using in her schemes, flying off her head and becoming lost, along with Taiga herself when she goes looking for it. This leads us to the scene that shows the ultimate failing of Ryuji's coping method. When Taiga wanted to keep her distance, Ryuji let her. He decided that the best way to cope with the rejection was to put all his effort into trying again, even at Taiga's expense. He wears regret for this mistake on his face so much that Minori doesn't second guess him when he wants to be the one to go get her. He realizes going down the hill towards the hair clip that, I did it again. I left her all alone. She was right next to me and I didn't even notice she was gone. If I find her, I swear, I'll never let her go again. Ryuji realizes at this moment that he does not want to leave Taiga alone, not even for the sake of getting together with Minori. Finally, he does find her, and Taiga, who is in a total daze and believes she is speaking to Kitamura, sees her coping mechanism fall apart. Her method of dealing with her true feelings has been to distance herself from Ryuji, and trust that the feelings will fade over time. But in this scene, we discover that none of it had worked, that no matter how much she wants Ryuji and Minori to be together, she, and I quote, can't stop loving Ryuji. If the Christmas arc was all about our characters losing their pieces, then this arc is about them trying to put those pieces back together in a roundabout, ungenuine way, and spectacularly failing to do so. Either due to unrealistic expectations or hypocrisy, none of our characters has made any progress in coming to terms with what happened over Christmas, except for Ryuji, who has not only decided that he will never let Taiga go again, but also has to deal with the information that she is in love with him. But that is it for this analysis. I'd like to thank my patrons, Orion Train, Quincy Chamberlain, Jaman5, Lars Espen, Shark, Data52, and Nerxu. If you want to be credited at the end of each video and have access to exclusive updates, why not become a patron yourself? Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.